Hey guys, it's Nick here. I'm with Academy.fm, and I'm going to teach you in this tutorial how to make an effective build-up for a house song. Although I'm going to be trying to teach you general concepts that you can apply to build-ups in any genre of music, because even though different genres of music can be using completely different techniques and sound totally different, the general concepts behind tension and release, which is what you're going to be working on if you're making a build-up and a subsequent drop, tension and release are ever present, they're omnipresent, they're ubiquitous in all of music. All of music has some concept of tension and release. And if you want to make a good build-up, you need to understand the concept of what it is to build tension, how you build tension. And unfortunately, the first kind of intuitive answers that you might come up with are probably correct. Tension usually involves increasing something. For example, you're taking a rubber band and stretching it out. You're increasing the length of the rubber band, and at some point it's going to break. You need to emulate that in sound. And luckily in sound, it's not that much different from any other physical phenomena that involves tension. You just have to increase, maybe not tensile force as you would with a rubber band, but the most basic way of increasing tension in sound is to increase volume. That's just a basic crescendo. You increase volume over time. That's a feeling of something that's about to come. You're increasing tension that way. Likewise, you can increase pitch over a period of time. Increasing pitch means that it's also you're increasing some parameter of the sound, and that's will result in a feeling of tension increasing. Likewise, if pitch were to decrease, the feeling of tension would subside. But since we're doing a build-up, everything is going to be going up for the most part. I mean, humans are fairly simple with regard to how they react to music and sound. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel and try to come up with some novel way of creating build-ups. When build-ups are really the most basic part of a song, you can obviously you need to embellish them artistically, or else they'll just be boring and kind of a waste of time. But if they are incorporated, if these concepts of tension are incorporated correctly, you can make an effective artistically sound build-up that people will remember, and that's very important, and it involves practice. But over time, you'll get these techniques down. You can apply them to any genre. So anyway, let's get started. We're going to be using a tempo of 125. We'll be using a metronome for most of it. We're going to be also adding markers into our timeline to remind us of when we need to do certain things. So when I'm talking about increases, right? That seems to be the common theme in a build-up. We're also going to be increasing our timing. The sense of timing will also increase, but you can't increase the sense of timing haphazardly. I mean, you can in some cases when you don't have a rigid structure or a rigid drum beat. But in house music, in a club, you tend to have a rigid drum beat, and you can't lose people by mixing up the drum beat using different time signatures and throwing away time signatures altogether. If you want to keep the club dancing, you're better off maintaining your structure, but just increasing the sense of timing. And I'll talk about that as we get there. So for that, just the preliminary step we'll do is right-click on the bar above here, where you get that little speaker symbol. Click Add Locator on the number 5. We're going to have an 8-bar buildup. Number 5 here is the second half of the buildup is beginning. For the first half, we'll have a fairly constant rhythmic section, but everything else will be going up, increasing. So the pitches and white noises and stuff, that's all going to be going up. But starting for the second half, the rhythmic section is going to go up. So the rhythm will start increasing in its timing. So it'll go up to say from 4/4 down to 2/4. And so on, but you'll hear it. You don't need to know theory to understand it. You'll hear it. So this is how we're going to do it, or rather, it'll just go from say 8th notes to 16ths and so on. If we're going to be technically correct here, but so leaving that aside, what we're going to do is we're going to just add a marker here and type in ×2. So our 8th notes or our quarter notes will become 8th notes, and our 8th notes will become 16th notes around here. So now instead of 4 bars, we'll have 2 bars later, we have a doubling. And again, it's this sense of increasing your urgency. We're not waiting 4 bars anymore for the next rhythmic crescendo. So we're going to add ×2 again. And the last bar, it's imperative that there's a bar of rest, or kind of a calm before the storm. You need a bar of silence, or sort of a winding down before the drop, so that the impact of the drop remains at its highest possible point. If you go right into the drop from the buildup, the drop is going to lose some of its impact. You need the drop to have its maximal impact, both for technical reasons, namely your limiters and compressors will react to the first transient without having to stay anywhere below 0, which would be the case if you have a loud buildup. All your compressors are still below 0, and you wouldn't have a huge kick here. If you have a nice quiet section, your kick is going to be really strong on your downbeat. But also, so not just for technical reasons, but also for just, I guess, human reasons, people will have, it'll feel as though they've been dropped into a cliff or something, and then finally the drop will pick them back up, and it'll be it's meant to be like a cathartic moment after this bar of like a down, winding down, and it'll all become more clear as we work here. So let me just add another locator, and just say, I guess, quiet or silence. We'll put quiet. So if we get our count right, we can use the metronome. 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. Increase in time. And then another increase. And then quiet bar. And that's the drop. Okay, we have our little system in place. Now we start to do what I was talking about, namely create sound, change parameters, going up. That's it. It's that easy. First thing we'll do is actually, we're not going to worry about white noise and stuff like that. What we're going to do is we're just going to create a basic snare roll. That's the most fundamental rhythmic element you can use in a house song to increase tension. That is very kind of obvious, because the snare is going to increase in how fast it rolls. And so since the snare is nice and loud and rhythmic, everyone's going to understand what's coming. So I'm just going to open up a Max for Live snare. You can use any snare sample, whatever you want, put it into a drum rack. I like Max for Live because it has a cool, it's just really easy to use, and you can increase pitch and stuff. So I suggest you go along with me and use it if you have Max for Live. If you don't, you'll just be using similar functions, which I'll mention. But anyways, go into your Max instrument and get a snare and throw it in. So all of these parameters, we have a lot of different parameters that we have, and all of them, let's just take every single one of them, except maybe tone, and increase them. So we need to do it in a rhythmic fashion. Let's have quarter notes or eighth notes for our first half. And to expedite this process, you just hold Alt, and you can drag out your notes, Command or Control B to get a pencil tool, and drag out your notes to stay on the grid all the way to that number 5. So this is how it's going to sound. So very simple. What you can do now is zoom in a little bit until our next marker. We draw half of that, so twice as many notes, into one bar until our next marker, which is the 7. And then we're just going to leave that for now. So what it's going to sound like is 2, 3, 4. And we can even go split it in half another time. It's going to sound very silly for now, but we're going to change the parameters so that it's going to sound less obscene later on. Obviously, we're going to keep going, and we have our little break. So we're not going to continue our snares there. So if we play this out from here, maybe. And then we have our drop. Okay. So it's starting to take shape. I'm just going to put a limiter here. I don't want my signal to clip. I already have one. Okay, so we have a basic structure for our snare. So now let's just start automating. First of all, are we happy with our color? So this snare can stay relatively constant for the first initial 4 bars. And then as soon as the snare starts changing in its rhythm, we can also start changing its parameters. This is a common technique that if you do it, you'll be fairly solid. So let's keep our tune, for example, at 30%. And hit A, by the way, to enable your, first of all, disable your keyboard input, and hit A to show your automations. If we start at 30, we want to increase our pitch of our snare. If you're using a sample, increase the pitch of your transposition knob for your snare drum. And try increasing it 100%. Let's see how that sounds. All right, not bad. We can obviously keep trying new things here. And this is where you can start getting creative. I remember I mentioned how everything, all your parameters in general should increase. And that might be true. I mean, it might be true in the sense that it's not gonna sound ridiculous if you do that for most parameters. But for instance, you can try tastefully doing the opposite for certain things to add some artistic flair. Let's say we use a decay for our snare. Increase the decay of our snare. What's gonna happen if we do that? Okay, there's nothing obviously wrong with that, but I think we can have a more interesting effect if we do the opposite. We cut the decay, but we do so in a way that only makes itself apparent when we have these really fast rolls. How do we do that? Well, we can just, for instance, start slowly cutting the decay along here, and then a more sharp decay cut here. Or what you can do to be a bit more elegant is hold Alt and make a curve so that it's exponentially decreases the decay falling along here. So let's see how that sounds. Okay, cool, right? So almost it anticipates this little break. You don't want to go head first into a total chasm. You want to lead your audience in so they're not suspecting this like cliff. You know what I'm talking about? I'm sorry for using all of this kind of poetic abstractions, but really that's what you have to be using because you're a human being making music for other human beings. And this is how human beings feel music, I think. It's that you approach this cliff, you don't want to be completely unprepared. Finally, another parameter you want to change is your high-pass filter. And I guess that's going to be our tone. So our tone is actually independent of our filter, I think. So just to save time, I'm not going to bother worrying about how to use the filter in this snare drum. What I will do, and what I suggest you do anyways, regardless of what you're using, is just attach a separate auto filter. We're going to use a high-pass filter. And again, all of our pitch and filter modulations happen after our first 4 bars, and then we do our snare modulations. Likewise, we're going to start our frequency at about 60. Use a low resonance, or 15% is fine, 10%, and minus 12, so you can bring it down even more. If you have a high resonance, it's going to hurt the ears as you rush up the frequency spectrum. Same concept, increase the frequency of your high pass filter. Not all the way, but just enough that you just barely lose the snare towards the very end. And also hold Alt, do the same sort of exponential curve. Oops, I've been modulating the resonance by accident. Undo that. Hit frequency, please. There we go. And then, yeah, we want to end at about, I'd say, 1000 hertz. Maybe even more. Like, just, we're actually going to be hitting the noise, and we want to end it at about where the noise starts, like the white noise element of the snare. So try this, hold Alt, bring it down. Okay, we can be more extreme. That's seems to be a bit too extreme at the very end. What we want to do is spread out the exponent and then bring down our filter, so you get the right balance of high pass, and also you don't want to lose the snare completely before the end of the roll. So now we have a rough schematic. You can obviously tweak to taste. I'm just giving you a very basic rundown of how to construct the build-up. So that's going to be our snare. Now what you can do underneath, and this is already getting into some minor complications. I'm just going to do a similar idea, but twice as slow underneath. And that's going to involve, instead of that, we'll try a different technique. We'll just use a simpler, and we'll use maybe some kind of a tom hit. Here you can use specific drum loops, which we might also look at. But we want to be constructing things from scratch here. I'm going to use some kind of a percussion. Hopefully we can find something. We want to find a low tom-like sound. This might do. Okay. Let's try that just for the sake of argument. We can then hot swap it out if we don't like it. Don't ever get bogged down in sample selection. You can always hot swap. Same situation. In fact, what we can do is we can just disable our automation mode and copy paste the MIDI. But we're going to do some minor modifications. Make it a different color, obviously. And we're just going to do this in quarter notes instead of eighth notes. And now if we play them together, it'll sound like this. And now we're going to go really weird and use triplet grids with a narrow or a medium grid to do some triplet fills with this low tom. But the same concept applies. We're increasing the timing, reducing the size of the notes, increasing tension in the timing of this bottom drum. Even though objectively it's slower than the snare, it's also increasing in speed. So actually, we don't need a triplet grid, actually. We can just disable this. We need to have... And then you create this little triplet groove. Where's our end of the bar? Right there. Repeat that twice. And then for the last one, you don't have to do obviously as fast as the snare. You can do a different pattern, but also it has to be faster. And then you're going to have another break here for the same situation. So what we've made so far is this. Or what you can do is you can actually leave it as well. You can do the same rhythm. That's also interesting. Or you can change it up a tiny bit. But I like how this sounds just as it was. If we just play this for the last part. Okay. Or what you can do is you can also, do a small change in the rhythm at the very end at the 7th bar. And you can do something like this. Yeah. So if we do this, duplicate that, that won't sound correct. Yeah, we have to cut right there and duplicate. And then have our last big hit. This is obviously a very wonky sounding tom. Let's try actually generating, or actually let's see if they have, we can use a kick actually. And just replace it with a kick actually, that might work. So that's going to be our low and supporting the snare drum underneath. Notice how it follows the exact same patterns, just in a slightly different flavor. Same increase in rate. If we want, we can also increase the transposition. For now, we'll just keep things simple and maintain the transposition. Now we're going to add a simple white noise buildup, white noise sweep, as they're called. Create a MIDI track as long as all the other ones. Go to Instruments, Operator, select your oscillator to be a white noise oscillator. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to reduce your volume a bit. It's going to be quite loud. And you're going to make a long note of white noise. It doesn't matter what pitch it's at because it's just it's not the looped white noise, it's just an oscillator. Yeah, we're going to have to replace that kick towards the end with something more tribal sounding, but what we're going to do now is we're going to make this white noise sound more presentable. The way you do that is you, first of all, have to use an auto filter. We're going to be using 2 filters. One auto filter to cut out most of the low end from this bass. We're not going to touch this auto filter anymore, because we don't want any low end rumble there. The other filter from our operator will be the low pass filter, and it's going to be going up and increasing. Actually, we can also add, what we're going to do is we're going to modulate both filters. What we do know is that the low pass will go all the way up the entire time, And to hit A to automate, we want the low pass frequency at a 12 decibel. Yeah, that's fine. And then automate that to go all the way up. Also, you can do the same exponential curve trick to accelerate it towards the end. And then we slowly await our work. But that is supposed to be our break bar. Instead of just cutting it off, we're gonna let it decay a little bit. Cool. Increase this up to 0. You can also increase the spread and tone. Make sure you increase the tone value. This tone value will just 100% will give you the entire high frequency content of that sound, and increase the spread to maybe 5%. It doesn't really matter because as soon as you increase it to 1%, it's going to max out your stereo field. This might be too low of an initial frequency. We want it to still be there in the beginning, not as loud. So to fix that, just bring up the initial frequency in the automation a tiny bit, maybe to here. That way we actually hear it. When I mentioned automating the high pass as well as the low pass, we can do the same high pass trick that we did for the snare and follow this exact curve with the noise. Maybe not as much, maybe up to here. The same high pass trick to bring us quietly into this cliff here, and how that's going to sound is as follows. Watch this filter. Cool. And then with the snare. All right, that's starting to sound respectable. Let's just replace this tom here. We are looking for something like a big timpani of some kind. I like this pack a lot. We can try... Okay, we're onto something here. That sounds like it's the one. So we can actually cut that one out at the end. I don't like that. The cliff has to be a cliff. It can't just have a little bit of something falling over it, you know? It has to cut off. Only the little bit of the white noise can keep going. But 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's your drop. That sounds like it also might work. We want something very aggressive and dominant in the low end. It's not that, actually. So to make this more enormous, what we can try is using Ableton Live 10's effect called drum bus. Drum bus will make this tom really huge. Make sure we're not going overboard. this is a pretty cool tool that basically allows you to distort your drums in a specific way so as to bring out their transients and to make them more powerful in the mix. So we can play around the drive and the crunch, the distortion algorithms. I don't think the transients need any accentuating here. What we need is maybe some reverb. Very light, because there's a lot of low end in there. I don't want to reverberate that. Okay, let's have a look here. Getting there. I like the fact that this doesn't modulate in pitch, because it gives us still kind of a fundamental bedrock that we always know that this this thudding big tom drum, it's keeping us kind of on the same beat when all of these are going off the rails. So what we're gonna add now is we're gonna add a little clap, and we will put a lot of reverb on it, and we will kind of start embellishing now because we have the general gist down. Do the same principle, find a nice loud clap, big clap. Whew. I like those first ones. I like this clap. And what we're going to do the same thing. We're just using one instrument here, so we don't need a drum rack. We need a simpler, since we're only using one sample. Cymatics, big clap. Throw that in there. And now we will use kind of the same notes. I don't want to change any rhythm here. We already have all our main rhythm changing elements. Let's keep this clap constant, maybe change it at the very end, but for most of it, I want to keep it the same. I went a bit overboard. Let's see how that is. And we could actually keep that one in there, actually. Oh, what do you think? I think that's a good idea. Because if we keep these claps rolling for the last kind of rest bar, you need something there to remind the exact timing of the drop. It's the worst feeling ever when there's a DJ playing a song and maybe CD skips or something, and where there hasn't been a rhythmic element for a while during the build-up, and people forget where their bodies forget where the drop is, and none of them align, and you kind of get this awkward situation. You want to prevent that, so you do that by subtly including maybe a hi-hat, counting down 4, but that's why you always have a voice in there yelling 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the ultimate, I guess, notification to people that the drop is coming and to stay on beat. You can do it with a voice. You can keep a kind of a subtle clap. Whichever way you choose to do it, it's really up to you. Very, very quintessential reverb. Nice high delay. No high cut. Maybe a high quality. Delete all of these. High decay time. That's a bit too much low end in there. We don't want it clashing with our other elements, so maybe filter out up until 200. it's fine. Because we have our tom down here, remember? And that's giving us all our low end that we need. See if we can reduce maybe. I need something more substantial in the noise department. There we go. Let's try that out. It's going to be quite heavy in the low end though. So again, cut it out. Okay. That, nobody's going to miss that. Have that go and see how it sounds like. Make sure we're not going too hot into our limiter. Bring everything down a little bit. All right, and let's add one last element. Also, be careful about going overboard with how much stuff you add. Right now, we have 3 rhythmic elements. I don't think we need any more. We have a clap that is keeping the groove the entire way. We have a snare that is just functioning to increase the overall tension of the buildup, because it's the middle. It's the most aggressive sounding element rhythmically, right? And it's the most obviously increasing in pitch with this pitch increase. And we have the underneath the tom that's giving us the bedrock. So we have 3 rhythmic elements. We don't need any more rhythmic elements. We have a white noise element, but we don't have anything that obviously is rising in pitch. And pitch is a huge component of a good buildup. Pitch increasing. So we'll just make a simple patch now. I think we can use the same premise with a filter. You can play around with it. We'll see if we really need it, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a saw, an operator. We can spread it out. We can use the unison spreading actually here. It's fine. Press M to enable your MIDI keys. So we all are going to do the same thing. Large MIDI clip. And then draw one note all the way. It's quite obnoxious sounding, so bring it down a little bit. I just played it all the way. I wanted to see if the pitch of the snare would line up. I think it's here. Yeah, so it's since the pitch ends on a snare on a pitch of G, then we want our main pitch of our actual siren sounding noise to also end there, so they're together. So what we're going to do, we're not going to obviously keep it just like this. We want to bring our pitch to a very low octave. And then we will go into our MIDI clip and click this button and just press the enable a point here. And this is your pitch bend. And I'm pretty sure the pitch bend goes all the way up to 1 or 2 octaves. Let's see. So we have to set this value. We want the pitch to keep going. And then we want this pitch to go all the way up to 2 octaves. So go into operator and bend this all the way up to your pitch, all the way up to 24 semitones, sorry. And that way, when you do this, it will sound very drastic. That's a bit too low. What we can do is we can simply actually, instead of doing the pitch increase for the whole time, actually let's try it for the whole time, and then just keep the constant tone for the very last. So if we play this now. Okay. So what we're going to do is just simply go into our MIDI track now and duplicate it so it's going to be an octave above itself. That way we have 2 versions of the same note, and they will both go an octave up, sliding together, and you're going to get a nice lead sound. So I'd much rather actually the pitch assert itself a little bit earlier, bring back this envelope to 7 to our ×2, and during the ×2, when the snares are all rolling, we want the pitch to be at its highest also. Actually, a little bit before that, a little bit after that rather. 7 1/2 should do it. And we should do the same technique with the filter, bring our filter down to maybe 500 hertz to start. So it's not immediately obvious. And then bring it up the same kind of manner as we did with the white noise, which we should rename. And this is just going to be saw with 2 W's. We'll keep it that way. Let's just quickly remind ourselves how our filter frequency looked for our noise. And then we will do that, drop that down, and do a similar sort of exponential curve coming up. Now let's see what happens. Almost. I think it deserves another octave above itself. And then we will add a tiny bit of modulation. And what we can try now is actually to use the LFO to modulate the rate of the pitch, which I think it's routed to by default. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take this rate and modulate it upwards, increasing tension by increasing the rate of the LFO as it goes up. Also the amount. So the amount of the LFO will go up, and its rate. I don't want it, probably let's just keep the values low for now. See what we'll end up with. Keep the rate low, bring that up as well. And let's see how that sounds about halfway through. Rate has to obviously go higher. Huh, it's a bit early for that. That's about right. And then I think our filter isn't opening up fast enough to get those final revolutions in there because we selected too much of a curve. Let's see how it sounds in concert. So what we want is that reduction in the rate not to be so immediate, so it's not going to just immediately go from such a high RPM to such a low one, and it sounds kind of comical. You want it to be a bit more reasonable, like so. So what we can do is actually all the way keep that there, and then we want our envelope to reflect that as well in our pitch. So what we can do is actually not do the rate itself, not change the LFO rate for the pitch as fast, but what we're going to do is we're going to, let's see how that is actually. We're going to actually aggressively reduce the filter on the low pass frequency of the filter. And what that's going to do is it's going to quickly get rid of this siren sound before the drop comes. We don't want any trace of it, just a second before it, because we want to still create this feeling of a cliff. And likewise, do the same effect with our filters. High pass filter. We don't want any of this crazy rumbling low end. Start it with 200, and this should be generally almost like a rule with buildups. You should be using a lot of these high pass filters not to clutter up the low end. So then you should be bringing this up to its peak and down when you have the break. Actually, in this case, I'm okay to keep it going because we don't want to bring the low end back just before there's going to be a new low end. So in the drop, that is. So we want to actually completely get rid of it. And so this is how it's going to sound. We want it actually a bit lower. We still want some bass in the beginning. And this is all about little corrections so everything seems smooth and natural. I think the LFO amount is increasing in a kind of an odd way. It's increasing too quickly at around this point. And this exponential curve tool is incredibly useful to fix that. There we go. See, we lost a bit too much of it to the auto filter. And that's about it. that's about it. What else can you do? And of course, I mean, you're gonna have your chants and stuff. You can throw in a cheeky little 1, 2, 3, 4. That'll maybe let's see if you're.
It's lit.
Well,
ransom. It's lit.
All right, let's not spawn any more memes.
Hey.
Oh.
But what is interesting is that you can actually look at these, because the whole point, this is all hopefully in your personal project. These are all kind of generic techniques that will help you actually create the raw elements of the build-up. It still requires some kind of musical component, hopefully stemming from your chords, melodies, and so on. So you should be readapting the chords and the melodies that you used in your breakdowns and your hook in a certain way so as to reinforce this build-up, so it's not just a boring increase in tension. You should also supplement it with something musical so people can still remember it. And so it's continuous with the drop and the breakdown and everything else, every other element of the song. And that's how you make a build-up for a house song. I hope you guys took away some concepts. I hope you took away the notions of increasing tension and how you can do that in several different ways. We talked about filters, how you can use filter frequencies, go increasing, decreasing. How we talked about having a bit of a precipice, a bit of a cliff before the final drop to bring the anticipation to its peak. And also the notion of differences in rhythmic timing and combining different rhythms. And the rest is up to you. You need to try and introduce your own chords and melodies from your hooks, your breakdowns, to make this build-up musical. All I did here was I just taught you some basic concepts and techniques to generate tension and release it. So I hope you can employ this in your own productions. Thanks a lot for watching, and have a good day.